the QR code. We are using the Worldly AI app. So you kindly scan the QR code. Once you are done scanning, you go to the next step, which is selecting the language, your preferred language. We have over 60 languages available. And then the step 3 to activate the voice translation or the transcription. So if you want to activate the voice, you will click on the unmute audio button and you have access to the voice translation. However, to read and listen to the transcription would be provided by the app if you don't choose the voice option. Okay, and the next would be how to access the survey. Yesterday, some of the participants experienced delayed in accessing the survey. So during the break times, we would project the QR code for the survey for you to have access to the survey. And then at the end of the session of the day, you would also receive an email with a link to the survey as well. The last but not the least, kindly, during the presentations, kindly put your questions in the Q&A chat box so that the moderator will be able to address your questions to the presenter. Thank you. So I'll now hand over to Dr. Henry Nagai, the facilitator of the plenary session, Writing the Untold African Stories. Dr. Nagai, over to you.
Thank you very much. Gordon, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So it's great to have the second day for this very important academy. And I'm very excited to be moderating, facilitating this particular topic, Writing the Untold Africa Stories. This is very important for us because it is said that until the lions have their historians, the history of hunt will always glorify the hunter. I think that it is time that we tell our own stories. But if we have to tell the story, we have to learn how to be a good historian. So the session is exciting, and we should all make our ears, ready for Professor Osayomi. But before I introduce him, I'll tell my own story. Over 2 decades ago, I happened to be a young clinician, an HIV clinical specialist in one of the epicenter towns in Ghana, where we have the highest prevalence of HIV at the time. And I happen to hail from that area. So it was just natural for me to, work in there and kind of give back to the community. When we move from prevention to treatment, we had a situation where we have to do the lab test we called CD4 counts. That determines your immune status. And we then use it to monitor how you are doing well on the newly introduced antiretroviral therapy. And we had a challenge. The challenge was that the community do not have an understanding of what CD4 cells mean, those immune cells that determine how good your immune system is. So what we had to do was to quickly get some, medical geographers and some ethnographers who help us to couch, a local name and how we can explain what CD4 cells mean, to the local community. And so it's important for us to tell our stories and also to include all the various specialists who can help us to tell our stories. Today, we're going to explore how we can tell our own African stories. And it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Tulope Osayomi, who is a professor of geography from the University of Ibadan. Importantly, Professor Osayomi, explores the intersection of spatial epidemiology and medical humanities. He's been researching in the area of COVID as well. And in March 2020, as the COVID pandemic, sweeps across, of course, Africa and the globe, the Professor Osayomi, founded and directed the COVID-19 mapping lab at the University of Ibadan. He also has been working and has been researching consistently some of the conventional narratives around this. He has published widely on the geography of COVID-19 and the spatial patterns of under 5 mortality. I must say that I think I read some of his works when I was, coordinating USAID's flagship program in Ghana during the COVID time. His recent work on the African COVID-19 paradox asks why the continent was spared from the devastating impact predicted by global models. Everybody thought that, well, Africa had weak health systems, and so we will, in Africa, there will be deaths like the way, like flies, but that never happened. Professor Sayomi explored and tried to answer some of the reasons why that never happened. He has been in different areas of research, and Sayomi has been honored as an African Oxford Initiative Visiting Fellow at the University of Oxford, and a Touch International Fellow as Oxford's Humanities Division. He has several other affiliations and honors. Currently, he's serving as a guest editor for a special issue on the spatial responses to COVID-19 in Africa for the Journal of Geovisualization and Spatial Analysis, published by Springer Nature. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce Professor Sayomi to take us through the writing, the untold Africa stories. So we pick the tactics of telling our own stories from the African perspective. Prof, you can proceed with your presentation. We have up to about 25 to 30 minutes of his presentation. And if the story is sweet, I'll let him carry on up to 30 minutes. Otherwise, I'll stop him between 25 to 30 minutes. Prof, you can take it away, and we'll come back to the questions at the end of within 30 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Henry Nagai. You're very kind. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good day. Let me start by expressing my warmest appreciation to a phenomenal mentor and colleague, Professor Morenike Upong, for this invitation. I truly consider it a great honor and privilege to give a keynote at this conference with the theme, Amplifying African Scholarship in a Complex World. And of course, in line with this conference theme, the title of my address is writing, as the moderator has said, is writing the untold stories of Africa. This choice reflects my long-standing interest in critical media and performance studies, two fields that emphasize the importance of sharing authentic stories about our rich and diverse African experiences. For a very long time, Western narratives of Africa dominated global discourse, and Africa was often represented through Western eyes. Some European historians even argue that Africa had no history until Europeans arrived. African historians strongly rejected this idea. As a young lad, I vividly remember watching the documentary series, The Africans, A Triple Heritage, written and narrated by the distinguished African historian Ali Mazrui. The series became famous because it challenged Western portrayals of Africa and presented Africa as a contributor to world civilization rather than merely a victim of history. This emphasis on authenticity partly explains the rise in high-quality Nollywood productions on global streaming platforms such as Netflix and Prime Video. A notable example is Journey of an African Colony, The Making of Nigeria, narrated and produced by Mr. Olashupo Shashore, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. In this documentary, he highlighted the scarcity of films telling detailed stories of Nigerian nationhood, despite the abundance of historical materials. And before his production, most of the videos we had on the history of Nigeria were produced outside of Nigeria. To me, this production represents the powers of Africans telling African stories without external distortion. It demonstrates why Africa must take ownership of its narratives to ensure that they are neither hijacked nor flattened into stereotypes. There is abundant content about Africa, but too often it is filtered through Western eyes. And I often wonder why more Africans are not at the forefront of amplifying African consciousness, agency, and identity. I'm currently reading a book written by Zainab Bedawi entitled An African History of Africa, published in 2024. While traveling across 34 countries, interviewing Africans about their histories, she became deeply aware of both the richness of African experiences and the urgency of documenting them. In her words, and I quote, "The book found me," end of quote. Beyond popular culture, my training and professional experience as a geographer have shaped also my thinking. And over the course of my academic career, I've also learned two important lessons. The first is that location is central to geography. And the second is that location shapes one's access to the benefits and the burdens of human existence. And this perspective has repeatedly led me to ask, is location a blessing or a curse for the African Academy, or perhaps both? This question emerges from the reality that Africa has long been burdened by negative stereotypes in media and policy circles, obscuring its many success stories. Africa's place within the global order often renders it invisible or marginal in shaping global narratives. Regrettably, the academy has struggled with inadequate resources, overstretched capacities, and limited publication outlets, and of course, the proliferation of pediatric journals. Yet, there is still growing recognition of the need to rethink, re-engineer African societies into knowledge societies, grounded in African realities and in aspirations. In line with the African Agenda 2063, African solutions for African problems. In the remaining part of my address, I will demonstrate how we can retell our stories from an African standpoint using a personal example. I will reflect briefly on decolonizing knowledge before discussing what I describe as the African COVID-19 paradox, a counter-narrative. Decolonizing knowledge, what, how, and why. The cardinal knowledge of every academic discipline is to produce knowledge for the advancement of society. However, this goal becomes difficult when knowledge production and dissemination are shaped by external influences. A colleague of mine, Dr. Oluwatosin Adeniyi, once remarked in a faculty lecture that Africa has historically occupied the margins of global knowledge production. The global north is often treated as the legitimate sites of theory building and methodological innovation, while the Global South becomes merely a source of raw data. In fact, Mignolo, 2009, observed that, and I quote, Africans are either the sources of the data or the data itself. Similarly, some authors have noted that Africa is often portrayed as a place of theoretical poverty, end of quote. Such assumptions reinforce unequal hierarchies of power and knowledge. This reminds me of a thought-provoking article published in PLOS Global Public Health titled, Who is a Global Health Expert? The authors of this very wonderful piece argued that scholars from low and middle income countries are frequently excluded from the process of knowledge production, despite possessing the expertise and the lived realities needed to address local challenges. But long before contemporary debates on decolonization, my mentor, the late Professor Akinla Omabuguje, Nigeria's first professor of geography, had already raised similar concerns. In 1977, in his university lecture here at the University of Ibadan, titled Finding Our Way, Our Way,
rotation.
he emphasized, and I quote, the need to re-examine our present strategies of development, end of quote, and question the suitability of Western development paradigms for African societies. Implicit in these remarks is what scholars describe as the colonial matrix of power, a system in which white, Western, Eurocentric perspectives are central, considered normative, universal, while other perspectives are categorized as inferior. Denying the existence of these colonial vestiges amounts to epistemic violence. For this reason, decolonization is essential. According to Kessie, Marx, and Ramungudo, 2020, decolonizing, and I quote, is an active opposition to coloniality as it seeks to reclaim and recenter other ways of knowing, doing, and being. In my view, decolonization seeks to dismantle the dominance of Western ideologies in knowledge production and authority, while recognizing alternative epistemologies as valid sources of theoretical and practical insights. Two examples I will quickly share, and these two examples illustrate this clearly. The first concerns geomorphology, the geomorphology curriculum at the Department of Geography, University of Ibadan. And let me quickly add that the Department of Geography is the first Department of Geography in Nigeria, established in 1948. It's also as old as the University of Ibadan. The gentleman on the screen, Emeritus Professor Adetoye Faniro, questioned why Western textbooks lacked African landforms examples, despite the continent's rich landscapes. In his response, he and his colleagues launched the Landscape Landform Examples from Nigeria series in the Nigerian Geographical Journal in 1969. And he felt that these examples would be useful for teaching not only at the university level, but even at primary and secondary schools level. And of course, it would also drive field trips to all these various landform sites. Though perhaps not framed as decolonial scholarship at the time, but it represented a deliberate effort to enrich teaching with local realities. The second example is one we all know very well, is the Rhodes Must Fall movement that began at the University of Cape Town in 2015 and later spread to Oxford University. The movement symbolized resistance against white supremacy and colonial glorification within academic institutions. As Kessie and colleagues argue decolonization must not become an add-on activity. It should be embedded in our teaching, research, and institutional cultures, and even in our everyday lives. So how do we practice decolonial scholarship? In this very, very wonderful article written by Danica Smith and Naidu on how to do decolonial research. Thankfully it's an open access article, so I would encourage you to please search and download. It's worth the read. These two female scholars proposed three components, three steps on how to do decolonial research. And the first is critical consciousness, reflexivity, and action. Critical consciousness. It has to do with developing awareness of colonial influences in research and academic spaces. It means that no epistemology is superior to another, and appreciating the diversity of thoughts shaped by various cultures. An example that will be challenging the notion, and one example I often use in my classes, is that of the Scottish explorer Mungo Park, who is often claimed to be the first man to discover the River Niger, which is absolutely wrong. And of course, in African literature, writers such as Chinua Achebe deliberately responded to Western depictions of Africa, particularly the book written by Joseph Conrad, The Heart of Darkness, as static or primitive, showing instead dynamic societies in works like Things Fall Apart. 2, deliberation. Reflecting on how we may have benefited or been disadvantaged by colonial structure, we must recognize that how may we have benefited or have been disadvantaged by the remnants of colonialism. For instance, discussions about Harvard University's historical ties to slavery illustrates how academic institutions benefited from colonial exploitation and the steps they needed to rectify these inequalities. And of course, they were not very proud of this very ugly past, and they had to commission a team to look into the legacy of slavery at Harvard, and that is a copy of the report, the commission's report, on the screen. But there is one other example I would like to share, and one that would resonate with us in the African Academy, is that must we publish all our work in Western journals for the sake of academic prestige or promotion? Something to think about. Many Africans reflect on how academic prestige is still tied to publishing in Western journals, even when studying African realities. The last but not the least, transformative praxis. It's all about actively promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and epistemic justice. Examples include reviewing the curricula in our various departments to include the epistemologies of the Global South. The second is actively citing African scholars in our research, and not just citing them because they are Africans, but is also to increase their visibility and also to reduce our dependency on foreign sources, and then also promote local knowledge production. And the third is recruit Black scholars in dominantly white institutions. In some of the best universities of the world, you'll be shocked to know how many Black scholars are employed as professors. I mean, in one that I know very well, there are only 10. And then the last is Global South scholars or Africans leading. We could also have Global South scholars or Africans leading teams, research teams, as principal investigators, but not as data collectors. Then also the last is also building institutions which fosters collaborations An example is this, the Manuscript Writing Hub, all right, which is hosting important conferences on the continent of Africa. As Danica and Sims, Naidu and Sims have rightly argued, by employing decolonial strategies, researchers can produce equitable and socially accountable and epistemologically just scholarship. In my own work on COVID-19 in Africa, supported by the Africa Oxford Initiative, I found that the pandemic challenged many long-standing misconceptions about Africa and exposed the limitations of dominant Western global assumptions. The African COVID-19 paradox, a counter-narrative. COVID-19, as we all remember, emerged in Wuhan, China, and within months became a global pandemic. Before the virus reached Africa, many feared catastrophic consequences for the continent because of fragile healthcare systems and widespread poverty. Several international organizations projected devastating outcomes. Melinda Gates warned in a CNN interview, as many of us will recall, that Africans might witness bodies on the streets, similar to scenes seen elsewhere. And these projections were rooted in Africa's development challenges, weak healthcare infrastructure. Yet, the continent emerged as one of the least affected regions globally. This gave rise to what my colleagues and I described as the African COVID-19 paradox. The question then became, why was Africa spared the scale of devastation widely predicted? Some media organizations attempted explanations. The BBC World Service even speculated whether poverty could somehow be acting as a vaccine against COVID-19. This suggestion, as we all remember, generated outrage across Africa. And as one social media response put it, and I quote, "They said we will die because we are poor. And now they are saying we are not dying because we are poor." End of quote. This came shortly after controversial suggestions that vaccine trials should first be conducted in Africa. Didier Drogba, the ex-football international, strongly condemned the idea, saying that Africans are not lab rats. To many Africans, these comments reflected the persistence of dehumanizing assumptions about the continent. As a medical geographer, I viewed Africa through a special lens. In geographical terms, as you can see on the screen here, Africa appeared to be a COVID-19 cold spot, a region below average concentrations of infection and mortality. In response to the pandemic, as you heard in the introduction, I established a COVID-19 mapping lab at the University of Ibadan. The lab provided daily and weekly updates on COVID-19 patterns in Nigeria and West Africa. At the height of debates around the poverty as a vaccine hypothesis, my colleagues and I decided to empirically test this idea. And our findings revealed a weak negative relationship between poverty and COVID-19, suggesting that poverty itself would not adequately explain Africa's relatively low mortality rate. This reinforced what Chimamanda famously described as the danger of a single story. In her words, the problem with stereotypes, and I quote, "The problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete." End of quote. To reduce Africa's experience of COVID-19 to poverty alone was deeply worrisome and ignored African agency. The Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria have a saying that has become one of my favorites, and it says, "The world is a dancing masquerade. If you want to understand it, you can't remain standing in one place." End of quote. Chinua Achebe further explained this symbolism when he observed that, and I quote, "If you are rooted to a sport, you will miss a lot of the grace." Inspired by these epistemologies of the Global South, I began asking what explanations best account for the African COVID-19 paradox, and how do they challenge dominant Western assumptions about Africa? Using a mixed method approach, including digital ethnography, social media analysis, and documentary review, several interconnected explanations emerged. Number one, history of epidemic outbreaks and effective containment. Africa's experiences with Ebola, HIV, Lassa fever has already equipped many countries with epidemic response strategies. Professor Christian Happy of Redeemers University here in Nigeria sequenced the first coronavirus samples in sub-Saharan Africa within 72 hours. Reflecting on Africa's expertise, he remarked that the West tends not to give credit to Africa where it deserves, end of quote. His statement reminds us that epidemic management is not always about wealth alone, but also about experience and preparedness. Tropical climates. Some scientists have argued that warmer temperatures and sunlight exposure may have reduced transmission or severity. And while climate alone cannot explain this paradox, it formed part of the broader scientific discussion. Late onset advantage and timely leadership. Africa benefited from the experiences of Europe and North America before widespread local transmission occurred. Early border closures, surveillance systems, and public health measures helped delay transmission. As Happy and Nkengasong later observed, Africa's early response was remarkable. 4, Africa's youthful population. Africa remains the world's most youthful continent. Younger populations generally experience milder forms of infection. And even as I often reflect on the NSAS protest in Nigeria, where large gatherings of young people did not produce the scale of infection initially feared by the Nigerian Disease Control Agency in October 2020. Number 5, innovation, creativity, and volunteerism. The pandemic revealed remarkable African ingenuity. In Senegal, the Pasteur Institute in Dakar rapidly expanded testing capacity and developed affordable diagnostic tools. In Nigeria, engineers volunteered to refurbish obsolete facilitators at Jos University Teaching Hospital. These examples highlighted the importance of local creativity and resourcefulness. Number 6, local medicine systems. Traditional medicine also became part of the public discourse. Again, we remember Madagascar's COVID-19 organics that attracted continental attraction, while many Africans turned to local remedies, like myself too, and herbal mixtures. Although scientific validation remained important, these developments demonstrated public trust in indigenous systems of knowledge. But apart from the Madagascar local herbal remedy, the governor of the state in which I currently live in Nigeria, Governor Seyi Makinde, reportedly used a herbal mixture of black seed oil and honey, highlighting the potency of indigenous medicine. The last but not the least is Africa's deep religiosity of Africans. Africa's deep religiosity and invocation of the divine agency might account for the paradox. Religion also played a significant role in how Africans interpreted and responded to the pandemic. Faith-based organizations became major actors in community mobilization, welfare provision, and public messaging. Irrespective of which explanation one finds most convincing, the African COVID-19 ultimately points to the power of African agency. Contrary to widespread stereotypes, African countries demonstrated resilience, creativity, and institutional capacity during a moment of global crisis. The world has important lessons to learn from this experience. The critical question now is, how can lessons from the COVID-19 experience inform future global policy and practice? Therefore, identifying and strengthening what worked on the continent can reposition Africa as an important contributor to global health knowledge, rather than being a mere recipient of external expertise. In conclusion, as we continue to engage the African experience, we must never lose sight of our positionality as a source of strength and possibility. But I would like to leave you with a few questions. Does our geographical location and Africa-based training confer unique advantages on our contribution to global knowledge? 2, how can African scholarship better reflect the continent's diverse cultures and philosophies? 3, what strategies can African academia adopt to transform aspirations into meaningful development? Let me conclude with a final reflection from my mentor, Professor Akinla Omabuguje. Decades after that, his famous lecture, he reminded us in 2007, and I quote, "We, the indigenous scholars of an underdeveloped country who live, or maybe I should say of a developing country, who live daily with the problems and frustrations of our underdevelopment, have the special responsibility of fashioning new conceptual and methodological tools to get our society off the present rut and onto the path of self-reliant development." End of quote. Let us be like the Nigerian vlogger, Tayo Aina, and I love this guy. Whoever knows him, please tell him that I love him, who travels across the world telling stories about places and people and cultures through an African lens. In fact, he describes himself as the African discovering the world. What stands out in his work is not just the visuals, but the perspective he brings as an African storyteller, engaging the world, the wider world. In many ways, this is a challenge for the African Academy to document, interpret, and share our experiences from our own standpoints and realities. Africa should not just be a subject of global conversations, but also an active voice shaping them. So let's write our stories. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Osayomi. This has been a very insightful and brilliant presentation. I mean, I like some of the sound bites of critical consciousness, dehumanizing, assumptions. And I think that you have explored the story. That's why I give you up to the 30 minutes and you stop us
Thank you
on
very
the
much.
30 minutes. I think that the books by Ali Masri and Zainab Badawi, I read them. The recent Zainab Badawi book is something I would recommend. I actually bought some copies to send to others. We have about 20 minutes for some questions. And someone sent me a side message to ask, I didn't introduce myself. I'm a medical doctor. I work in infectious diseases and public health. And I manage large-scale projects. And my bio is in the document, so you can refer to that. We have some questions, Prof. and others. And the first one is looking at what you mentioned regarding publications. That is very, very important. I had to kind of declined my name being included in some publications. It just came out because I felt that I was not being treated and given the right spot within the authorship. So you can imagine, especially for high-ranked publications, there's a question that, are there credible African journals that we can publish in so we don't rely heavily on Western journals? Because you know about the ranking of journals and what it means that I have my own perspective on that. But let me ask you that question. We also have Dr. Lawal also will make a contribution to that as we go through some of the questions, a few of them that we have within the 20 minutes. What are your thoughts, Prof?
All right, thank you. Thanks for your question, Charity. Yes, there are plenty of credible African journals. Africans are doing great work on the continent, right? I don't know what your background is. Maybe I would have, suggested a few, but there are plenty of journals, and a good place to start from is the AJO African Journals Online Database. It's what do I call it? Maybe I should call it a journal base. It's a very long list. It has up to nearly 1,000 African journals from different disciplines. So, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you shouldn't publish in Western journals. Please do. And of course, you also need to look at what is obtainable in your different African universities or institutions. For instance, the University of Ibadan, there is this dichotomy between local and foreign journals. So, but I also know that there are some universities, even within Nigeria, that they prioritize local journals. They give, higher weights, assign stronger weights to local journals than foreign journals.
Good. Yes, so that's important, and I like the pointer to the African journals side. I'll also quickly add that I'm not a typical academic, although I'm an adjunct at the College of Physicians and Surgeons, but we must be looking at what we publish that can make impact, that can change things apart from the academic side of things. And one of the things that I'll add, we take note of each time we have resources to publish something from our context. Let's make sure we can allocate some budget for open publication. Pay for the open access or publish in African journals that are open access, so many people can read and use the what we recommend, and can also work on further. So that's a good question, Charity. Let's move to Sheriff. Sheriff says that is there a possibility of getting the slides after the conference? Yes, I think that will be so once the survey
Dr. Nagai, I don't seem to hear you.
That has also been answered. We have a lot of questions about the journals, and I would suggest that during the skill building, probably we can give some websites and some links to this. My own experience tells me that if we want more readership from African side, we publish in the open access, or we paid for the access through our projects or our works, so that there can be more people reading from our continent, since not everybody is able to pay. We also have a question. I have some, but I want to make sure that we go through the ones that we have others posting. Still, it's about the journals. Probably Society of East in Africa will take note of this, and we will include it in the skills area to kind of point to journals. What are the tactics and techniques of, choosing particular journals in which you want to publish, which are African, and how they align to topics. I think that it's a burning request. Now, Prof, we know that in the continent, we as in the medical fraternity, we are typically not, only a few of us I have interest in reading history and history books and try to tell our stories. How do you think, in your experience, how do you think that works from this area of response, to public health issues, medical geographers and those in the humanities, the medical humanities, can make their voices heard in our health systems, in terms of strengthening our health systems and pandemic preparedness and responses? How can we do that? I'm saying this against the background of what is happening today, where we have the Ebola new strain that is causing this challenge. You can see that we don't have a vaccine, but could we have known that we have this variety and therefore could have been preparing, today, for example? Let me give you a second example also. When we had the name for mpox, and I must take the opportunity to commend SAR. SAR organized a webinar. I happen to have been one of the speakers that went in depth to ensure that we push and add to the voices that be not to refer to the mpox as it were monkeypox, because of the stigma and other things that go with it. So against all this background, how do you think that those within your area of work can lend their voices, okay, to our pandemic preparedness and health system strengthening, so that we will be able to put out publications and write-ups that can strengthen our health system?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nagai. I think the problem is that we've all, for many years or for a very long time, we've been operating in silos, right? So most of the work we do is interdisciplinary. So we hardly engage other disciplines. I think for me, I reached an inflection point in my career because I found out that what I was doing was becoming very, very, very uninteresting. It was more or less, it was becoming very pedestrian. And I was trying to figure out how I could, try and give my work a new lease of life. And I then began to engage with other disciplines, similarly related disciplines, such as the medical humanities, the medical social sciences, and also some of your disciplines in public health and also in medicine. Again, let me also say a bit more about my background. I trained as a quantitative geographer. So you can imagine the statistics, the rigor, and all of that. Yeah, so, but I felt the numbers were not adequately enough. They were not adequate. We needed to also have the narratives of illness and well-being. What are the narratives? So I think to answer your question directly we need to collaborate more. We need to engage with one another. And I think one way of doing it is by attending conferences. If you feel you have a lot to offer, why don't you go for this conference? You could go for a conference in genomics. You could go for a conference in medical humanities. You could go for a conference, as long as you know that you have something to offer, all right? And then also at these conferences, network, build collaborations. Who knows? Publications might rise. Funding opportunities might also be given birth to there. And before you know it, you then have what you call interdisciplinary centers of excellence, looking into cross-cutting issues that have to do with health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. There's a question here. How do we navigate the issue of older generation at the helm of affairs in academia in Africa, who seem to, lean towards Western knowledge? How do we manage that? That's the question. And it's asked that they would rather talk down efforts at decolonizing Africa and prefer Western epistemologies.
I, I'm sorry,
What I
could you repeat the question? I didn't hear
No,
you
the
clearly.
question is talking about decolonizing Africa and the
Okay,
preference for Western epistemologists, as it were,
yes.
in terms of the older generation of Africans in academia.
Okay. Does the person want me to comment about why people are adopting
Yeah,
Western
I think
epistemology?
he wants a comment on it. That's the view
Okay,
that
yes. Well,
the older
I
generation
will
has.
just say that yes, we tend to. I'm also guilty. I won't say I'm a saint, but and of course it's not my fault. It's also due to the training most of us had. We inherited many of these concepts and frameworks, but I think it's also high time to now look inward and celebrate these epistemologies of the global South. We have a lot that we can actually use to explain our African realities. I know it's going to be pretty hard because we are really working against a very, very dominant, it's an unequal relationship we really have here. So it's going to be tough, but we just need to start appreciating what we have. But if we tend to, privilege Western thinking over African thinking, that is what we would then call epistemic silencing or epistemicide, more like a systematic erosion of our African value systems and knowledge systems, which would not be good for us. So as we say in my part of the world, we celebrate what we have, all right? So we need to learn to celebrate what we have and demonstrate the utilitarian value of these epistemologies to our own research. And you'll be surprised how much results or insights you will draw from that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll add one perspective on this and to say that, when we understand deeply, as Prof mentioned, where we are, and we are able to collate and triangulate information within the spectrum for the health system, it helps a lot. And what you mentioned as critical consciousness is very important. Let me mention that as we speak, one center that I support, Digital Health Center, is looking at a lot of parameters that has racial algorithms. And currently, you know how we train AI models in medicine. 19 parameters that has these racial algorithms, for example. One of them is a famous kidney function test that we do. It is only in 2022 that we had to change the equation, to remove the racial bias that is in it, because we're having more and more kidney diseases being understand, we query things from our own perspective and globally. There is another question about the media. How can we support, African media and content created to stop portraying Africa as the West setting in the world? You have been in that interface. What will you say?
Yes, I would just say, just have a look at this gentleman I mentioned a while ago, Tayo. He's doing fantastic work. He started 2017, and he first of all started by, promoting Africa, and now he's all over the world now. But, I think is the question, the answer to your question is actually in your question. Stop portraying Africa as, as a bad place, all right? Let's begin to point out the success stories, the untold stories of, of resilience, of ingenuity, of excellence, African excellence. I think that is what we should start. I think this morning while I was looking for the book you mentioned, I also stumbled on another book I bought some years ago, An African Abroad by Olabisi Ajala, a Nigerian who was known to have toured the world on a scooter. All right. I mean, these are the kind of stories we should celebrate. I mean, these are the kind of people we should celebrate. It would be nice to have a movie, a Hollywood movie or a Nollywood movie on this guy. I mean, these are the kind of things that would really, really portray Africa as a very, very great place. Thank you.
Okay, there are a number of questions on this thing. We have about 4 minutes more. Then there's a follow-up question by Joel that what can we do to ensure that African journals are given higher consideration for promotion and ranking in African universities? You are a university professor. What should we thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think
Briefly.
my personal observation, and I once commend colleagues all over the continent that who are really tried hard to see that our, our journals are given global visibility, but there's still a lot more to be done, all right? There are still many journals that are still not on the radar, the global radar. Some of them are, some people don't know they exist. I mean, for instance, let's make it, for instance, the Nigerian Geographical Journal, which is the flagship journal of the Nigerian Geographical Association of Nigerian Geographers, has no online visibility. And we have been pushing that they should put this thing online. So if we have our journals online and there are quality standards are maintained, you would see that people would begin to, it will begin to draw attention and traction. And then people will then publish. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is a very good feedback on that. We also have a comment here, a very important comment, that decolonizing public health in academia also means shifting power to African-led research funding and others. There's a question here again about best way to write a review paper. So that is the reason why we have this gathering. This is very important academic hub, and we have very experienced people within the space to take us through how to choose a journal which is African, how to write review papers, etc. And I'm sure that the organizing team will do that. We have just about a minute, and what I'll do here is to take the opportunity to thank you very much, Prof, for the very insightful and exciting presentation that you have made, and to thank Professor Morike and the Society of AIDS in Africa team, Gordon and everybody else for this plenary session, which has been very insightful. And I'll pause here and hand over to Gordon to introduce the next section. Thank you all very much, and we'll respond to all your questions in the chat, as it were. Bye from me. Over to you, Gordon and Stephen.
Thank you, Dr. Nagai. We now move to the second segment of our webinar, which is the oral abstract presentations. This session is going to be facilitated by Dr. Stephen Eisiado. So I hand over to Dr. Stephen Eisiado. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And I want to thank Dr. Harry Nagai for starting the day for us. On behalf of the Society for AIDS and STI in Africa, I welcome all of you to this abstract session titled Vulnerable Populations, Mental Health and Sexual Reproductive Health. Today, we are going to have the opportunity to listen to 5 abstracts and 5 speakers. And I entreat you to refer to the manuscripts booklet for page 34 to 36, where you'll find the details of these abstracts. But just prepare yourself to listen to these presentations. We're not going to take too much time because each presenter has 4 minutes plus or minus 1. And then after that, we have just barely 20 minutes to have questions and answers. Today, the session recognizes that silence in global scholarship is not accidental. It's produced by structural inequalities in who gets funded and who gets published and whose questions are deemed worthy of investigation. For decades, the dominant narratives about Africa have been authored from outside the continent, often reducing complex realities to single stories of disease, poverty, or conflict. This session calls on emerging researchers to actively break that silence by presenting work that centers African perspective, methodologies, and solutions to African problems. We believe that by providing this platform, these African researchers will present certain findings, peer-reviewed and all that, and that will ensure that we're able to tell our story very well. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Stephen Eisiado, as you are aware, a member of the Society for AIDS and STI in Africa and IAS, consultant public health, the immediate past program manager of the National AIDS and STI Control Program, an academic mentor at the College of Physicians and Surgeons and the School of Public Health, member of advisory board for HIV Cure Research Project at Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research, and member of the Africa Research Board of the Global Impact Center, supervisor of various postgraduate and graduate students. And I want to thank the society once again for this opportunity. So, ladies and gentlemen, without wasting much time, it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker. And the first speaker is by name Dr. Josephat Avoke. Dr. Josephat Avoke. The title of his abstract is Gender, STIs, and HIV Among Young People in Kufo, Benin, Equal Knowledge and Unequal Protection. Doc, take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I share my slide?
Yes, go ahead and share.
Okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am representing the team. I'm called Christabel Masamanda. Okay, I would like you to know that in Benin, young women know as much as young men about HIV. But there is this question that remains in the minds of everyone. So why are they still much at risk? I would like you to meet Adisa, a 19-year-old young girl from the commune of Lalo in the Kufo department of Benin. She's the eldest child in a large polygamous family of 15 children. Every day, she works hard as a seamstress to support her parents and cater for her 14 brothers and sisters. For the past 8 months, her boyfriend has been supporting her financially. He buys some fabrics and even pays the fees of her younger siblings. Because of this support, Adisa feels responsible not only for herself, but for her entire family. One night, as an African man, the boyfriend asked for sexual intimacy without any protection, which was never the case. He gives her very little time to think and makes her understand that refusing could change everything. Adisa knows the risks. She understands that sexually transmitted infections, including HIV, are dangerous. She also knows that her boyfriend may not be faithful, but she is afraid of losing the support that comes from him. Torn between protecting her health and protecting her family, Adisa finally says yes to the proposal. You see, Adisa's story is not an isolated story. We conducted a cross-sectional baseline study using a 2-stage probabilistic sampling method among 851 young people aged 18 to 24 years, including female vendors, apprentices, artisans across the 6 communes in the department of Kufo. Our study focused on 3 main dimensions, which was grouped into 7 variables. We had knowledge on on HIV and STIs. We had prevention behaviors and young people's negotiation power in sexual relationship. Our data was collected using a digital tool designed on Kobo Collect. The data was then subjected to a descriptive, bivariate, and multivariate statistical analysis using SPSS 27, including chi-square test and logistic regression with a significant level set at 5%. And this is what our results reveal. The finding clearly shows that this is not a lack of information, but a lack of power. Indeed, 99% of young people know the methods of preventing HIV and other sexually transmitted infection. Yet this knowledge is not enough for them to be protected. Only 23.3% of young women reported currently using condom, compared to 52.1% of young men. While testing of HIV during the past 12 months also remained lower among young women, with 28.2% and 41%, 28.2% for women and 41% for the young men. Young women are also more exposed to sexual pressure. In fact, 9.6% of young women reported having experienced pressure to engage in sexual intercourse, compared to 5.2% of young men. Even more concerning, 1 in 3 women does not have the ability to refuse sexual intercourse without receiving negative consequences of her choice. Only 65.5% of young women reported being able to refuse unprotected sex, compared to 73.3% of young men. This finding shows that young women know the rules of prevention, but do not always have the power to put it into practice. And I would like us to know that all of our results showed statistical significant difference. You see, Adisa's story reminds us that knowledge alone is not enough. Young people, especially girls, also need support, they need protection, and the power to make safe decisions about their health and their future. Our results will be shared with NGOs working in the KUFO department of Benin to strengthen, to adapt, and better guide their intervention in the fight against HIV and AIDS. And so far as these interventions are concerned, they will be intervening in the domain of economic empowerment, strengthening the power to act, social and gender norms, supply of and access to service, advocacy, and institutional strengthening. Therefore, let us give young girls the power to act, to decide, and to protect themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You hit it rightly. Let's give the young girls the ability. Let's give them the power. Let's empower them. Thank you so much for that, Chris. You made it in good time. And my second presenter is Mr. Tochukwu Gerard Ezekwe. His abstract is titled The Effect of No Means, No Worldwide on Sexual-Based Violence Knowledge Among Adolescents in Benue State in Nigeria. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't, can my slides be projected? Okay, thank you very much. That has rightly been introduced. That's the theme of my abstract. So we can go to the next slide, and I'm Tochukwu Ezekwe, working with APIN Public Health Initiative Nigeria. So do we know that 1 in every 2 adolescents experience sexual-based violence? Why is this so? They just lack the basic knowledge, awareness to protect themselves. This is my reality in Benue, because we are frequently plagued with conflict, displaced family structures, economic hardship that predisposes our adolescents to all forms of vulnerability and violence, including sexual-based violence. And it's because of this critical gap and lacuna that programs like the No Means No Worldwide are sponsored, promoted by agencies, government agencies, donors, funders, to educate adolescents on knowledge on sexual-based violence. Because if adolescents are better empowered, you have a safer community. But the next big question is, how effective are these programs? Do they do what they are supposed to do? And that's what gave birth to this study. Please, next slide. Because like I said, that will give birth to this study because this study measures the effect of knowledge of sexual-based violence among adolescents, both boys and girls, of this cohort population. How was it done? I used a quasi-experimental study and I sampled 5314 adolescents with this age cohorts, and the outcome variable that was measured was sexual-based violence. And what did I find out? There was a significant increase for both boys and girls by 68% and 72% respectively. And this was reinforced with a p-value of less than 0.01 for boys and 0.014 for girls. And suffice to say that these findings corroborate with a study that was done in Uganda and Tanzania using this model and this outcome variable. So in conclusion, we can strongly say that the No Means No Worldwide had an effect in improving the knowledge of sexual-based violence among this cohort for both boys and girls. What is the social implication? One, empowerment through knowledge. When adolescents are informed, they are better empowered, and you have a safer community because knowledge is power, knowledge is strength. Secondly, from the findings, we can see gender inclusive impact. From our findings, we observed an increase for both boys and girls, which promotes equitable protection and reduces gender vulnerability. It's not the case whereby it's just only the girls that are being trained, but the boys also understand things like bystanders intervention. What do I do when I want to seek for help? What do I do when I want to intervene? And lastly, this study has potential for scalability to other regions like mine that are plagued by consistent crises, displaced family structures, thereby exposing adolescents to all forms of vulnerability like sexual-based violence. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Tokuchu. Thank you. That was crisp, and it's clear that SBV is real and high targeted at AGWI. We will talk about it later. So let me quickly invite Nomatema Brenda Sibanda, who speaks on the burden of poor mental health and structural barriers to care among gender and sexual minorities in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. Over to you, Sibanda.
Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening in the different parts of the world. My name is Nomathemba Sibanda. I'm a public health researcher based at the National University of Science and Technology in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. And I'm going to be engaging you in some poignant discussion on the mental health of gender and sexual minorities. So imagine with me, if you will, living in a country where your identity is criminalized, where seeking help means risking exposure, discrimination, or even worse. You don't have to imagine anymore. This is the fate of at least 5% of all individuals who are living in Zimbabwe identifying themselves as being gay, lesbian, or transgender. In the country, 4 in 5 gender and sexual minority people actually then report poor mental health. Yet 1 in 4 have actually ever accessed care. This is not a knowledge gap. This is a structural failure. And this research that I'm sharing with you today asks the question why. Next slide. Gender and sexual minority, or GSM, populations in the country exist in a context where they are nearly invisible. Population level prevalence of depression, anxiety, and stress is virtually unmeasured. And this is not an issue of just data being missing. The law itself is creating that silence. Criminalization of same-sex relations combined with stigma and homophobia is worsening the plight of these individuals. Sorry. So this study that we conducted is a cross-sectional study which looked at 247 GSM participants, which were recruited through community-based sampling in Bulawayo, according to the network sampling. The sample was predominantly bisexual, with a mean age of about 29 years. Using binary logistic regression, we managed to analyze our data, and the data that I'm going to share with you reflects results that are unsettling. So our findings are quite distressing and unsettling. 78% of the participants reported poor mental health. And basically they were actually asked what conditions they actually thought were those conditions that are regarded as poor mental health. And there was depression, anxiety, as well as stress. Yet only 24.7% of these have ever accessed help. That gap is not incidental, it's structural. Most strikingly, there is a bit of use of cannabis. And this cannabis use is associated with a failure to access, a fear of accessing healthcare. So in this case, I would want you to think of cannabis use not as a moral failing, but rather as a coping signal, as a way in which they actually handle some of their stress or frustrations. And then begin to talk about ways in which you can actually assist individuals who are identifying as GSM in getting a comprehensive package of care. So the infrastructure that we have is failing our people. The infrastructure that we have mainly talks about key populations. It talks about key populations existing and them preventing HIV, managing HIV, curing HIV. Yet instead it neglects all issues pertaining to their mental health and things like stigma, which are worsening that mental health. So what are we saying at the end of the day? We do not need any new platforms. We need to have the ones that we have more affirmed. They need to be able to get the services right to the people. These services need to focus not only on just HIV prevention, management, and care, but rather move into providing comprehensive mental health care services. How do we do that? This is engaging health workers, training them, affirming the current care, reframing cannabis use not as a problem, but rather as what they have been using as a solution, and then assisting them to get past that cannabis use. This suffering is actually invisible because of the system. However, here we have a platform and we are going to be discussing it. How do we move past making this an invisible problem to becoming a real problem? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. We will be interrogating that. These are very important things. Mental health is intricately linked to the survival status of our recipient of care. Our fourth speaker is Deborah Oluwafanke Okegbile, who presents on sleep, academic workload, and extracurricular activities among students at the College of Health Sciences and Private University in Nigeria. Over to you, Deborah.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Okegbile Deborah. I'm a physical therapist, and that as when I was a student, a clinical student, as I transitioned into the clinical aspect of my course, I experienced a shock because it was a schedule I wasn't used to. We had classes, we had to be in the clinic from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Then we had an hour break. Then we had classes from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. After that, add to the mix being on call duty, having to read for your test, having assignments to do, having to do some extra reading or finishing up your slides. Then if you're now a person that engages in extracurricular activity like sporting activities or volunteering for non-governmental organizations or even community outreaches as a future healthcare provider, it was a bit daunting. And as I looked at my classmates, as I looked around, I asked that, how can I balance my academics and my extracurriculars? Is it necessarily by sacrificing my sleep time? So that seemed to be the most obvious answer, which I began to do, which eventually led me to developing insomnia in my fourth year of clinical school. So that played a major part in motivating me to carry out this study. So why are we interested in why clinical students are losing sleep? First of all, sleep matters way more than we think. It plays a huge role in memory consolidation, in accurate decision making, and emotional regulation. And these are all very critical for future healthcare providers. And also the schedules of clinical students are uniquely demanding. We have clinical rotations to attend, we have examinations, lectures, a huge number of slides to consume, then or include extracurricular commitments and these are all competing for the same 24 hours in a day. And as I looked at existing research, I saw that previous researchers had carried out studies on academic performance and sleep quality, or even academic workload and sleep quality. So I decided to include extracurricular activities into this mix. So what I found out among the 260 clinical students that I recruited for this study was that students who studied more were significantly associated with worse sleep quality. That's the more hours they studied, the less and worse they slept. And students who spent more time on their extracurricular activities slept significantly worse. I also saw that only 31.2% of students reported a sleep duration of up to 7 hours, while some others were getting as little as 4 hours of sleep per night, which is way below the recommended average of 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Now, what steps should we take? This was a cross-sectional study, so it doesn't directly imply that excessive academic workload and extracurricular activities cause poor sleep quality, but it shows us that there is a relationship and that the results are too strong to ignore, so institutions need to act. How can they act? By promoting healthy sleeping habits among their clinical students. And also for the fresh clinical students, those that are just transitioning into the clinical aspects of their courses, you can promote or host seminars that can teach time management so that they can be mindful of their sleep quality and also promote healthy habits for them. Then institutions can also rethink scheduling. They can build their timetables, curate timetables and schedules with the sleep quality of their students in mind. And also further investigation, further research can carry out longitudinal studies that can tell us exactly what to fix and how we can fix it. Now, I want us to know that we cannot reduce academic workload because we have certain standards that need to be met. We have certain curriculum demands that need to be met, especially when training clinical students. But if we are training tomorrow's healthcare providers, we cannot afford to run them into the ground. So we need institutions to take notice and begin to act. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We need to excel, but we have to sleep well to excel. We'll talk about that later. Our last but not the least presenter is Joy Oyinloluwa Adejiji, who speaks on the association of pain with physical activity and health-related quality of life among patients with knee osteoarthritis in Oyo State. Over to you, Joy. Make us happy.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, good afternoon. So I'll be sharing my screen now. Sorry. Okay, please can the screen be shared instead? I think I'll just take it from there. The slide rather. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Joy Adediji. I'm a physiotherapist from Abuja, Nigeria, and today I'll be talking about my topic, which is pain, physical activity, and health-related quality of life in knee osteoarthritis. Now, what if the biggest problem in knee OA is not that patients are moving less, but that their pain is silently destroying how they live, function, and feel? That is the silence that my study breaks. Knee osteoarthritis is often discussed as a mobility problem, but in Oyo State, Nigeria, I found something more troubling, which is that pain is not mainly stopping patients from being physically active, but is affecting their quality of life in ways that go beyond movement. And so many patients with knee OA are told to stay active, and that advice is important. But in our setting, we still know little about how the pain that they feel actually connects with not just their activity, but also their health-related quality of life. And so my study asked a simple question. Among patients with NEOA in Oyo State, how is pain associated with their physical activity and health-related quality of life? And this led me to conducting a cross-sectional hospital-based study among 79 adults with knee osteoarthritis, attending physiotherapy clinics in 3 different teaching hospitals in Oyo State, where I measured physical activity, health-related quality of life, as well as their pain intensity, and I used validated tools and examined how they were related. And here is the next slide, please. And here is the key finding. Pain intensity was not as significantly associated with physical activity. However, pain was significantly associated with health-related, with all the domains of the health-related quality of life, which includes mobility, self-care, usual activities, anxiety or depression, as well as pain or discomfort, which simply means that in these patients, pain was hurting their lives more than their activity. That is, patients may still be active, but they are doing so while suffering. In other words, the problem is not only movement, the problem is pain driven, poor well being. And that changes the message for care. If we only tell patients to move, we may miss the deeper burden that they carry, which is the pain that they feel from new way, and how this pain is making their daily life harder, limiting their independence and lowering emotional support as well as their emotional well-being as well as their mental well-being, even when their activity continues. And so the message from this study is clear, which is that in new OA, pain is not just a symptom, it's a lived burden that shapes how people function and how they feel. And that means our response too must change. So the practical implication of this is that physiotherapy and community health programs must not just focus on getting patients to move more, but they should also focus on pain management. Next slide. Pain management, their emotional support, as well as graded low impact exercises. Because the goal is not just movement, the goal is better living. If we truly want better outcomes for knee osteoarthritis, we must, aside physical activity, we must stop treating health-related quality of life as the side issue. We should not just ask patients to move more, but we should help them to live better. Thank you.
Well. Thank you so much. All are presented. Thank you, Joy, Brenda, Deborah, Gerald, and the rep of Joseph. If it was possible, this is a webinar, so we don't have all the access to the emojis. But I think it would have been appropriate for us to all together give a thumbs up to all of our presenters for this great job. We have a few minutes to discuss. You can type your questions in the Q&A session. If you are joining us, this is the abstract driven session. And so far, we've received 5 presentations and on different topics. And in summary, the first presenter highlighted that there's a high gap between knowledge on prevention and then practice. The adolescent girl and young woman is very vulnerable and must be empowered. Sexual gender-based violence is very real and high amongst young girls and young children, younger women. And knowledge is power. If we are able to educate them, then they can also protect themselves. They can resist any form of abuse, for that matter. And then we had a very interesting presentation linking our mental health to the various interventions. Stigma and discrimination is very high, and 78% of the people who were actually studied reported poor mental health, which is very critical for us to link people receiving care to mental health services. And the fourth is turning insomnia into inspiring research. And we were very happy to hear that if you plan well, you can still sleep well and you can excel. Planning is very critical to make sure that you don't have a sleep deficit and sleep inertia. Pain management is very key. And this is where palliative care must come in to make sure that people who deserve pain care get it at all cost. And last but not the least, we are here to now invite questions. If you have any questions, please, let's see your questions. You can type it in the chat box, in the Q&A box, and then we'll answer. But if you also want to ask verbally, you can raise your hand. And then if I see you, I'll give you the opportunity to, ask your question. Already, I can see that somebody has asked the question. The first speaker said that knowledge is not enough when it comes to saying no to sexual intercourse among young adults. Can you explain further on what young adults need to do to overcome this? So, can you answer this question for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for the question. What exactly do we need to do as other adults? Sorry, I want to get to the question so that I can.
The first, okay, so knowledge. You see, knowledge is not enough. We know that
Yes,
knowledge
sir.
was high, but people were not practicing. And
Yes.
prevention activities, yeah. So the question is that what must young people do, adults do to overcome this?
Thank you so much for that question. The first thing we recommend to be done is economic empowerment. We believe that if young people are being empowered, especially the young girls, they will have the ability to refuse. If you take, for example, the story I shared about Adisa, she had no choice than to accept the advances of her boyfriend because he supported her financially. And if she says no, the guy may leave. And she has 14 brothers and sisters depending on her. And that will be so much for her. So if young girls can be empowered, how we put in place income generating activities and we connect them to decentralized financial services, we think that it will help these young women to be empowered. The second thing is strengthening the power to act, since that's where the real problem lies. If we said we're going to share our results with NGOs, and in sharing our results with NGOs working already in this department, one of the things we will be suggesting to them in order to strengthen the power to act is to offer role play exercises on negotiation, which can be integrated into their different activities. That is, we put in place a role play activity that will be integrated into their activity. And one other one I want to add is advocacy and institutional strengthening. We realize that the female condom is not always available for younger girls or for girls to have it with them. So most of the times when they are at the point of having a sexual intimacy, they just have to go by the rules of what the boy is saying. So if female condoms can be available, free, I think it will help these young girls to have something that they can use when sexual intimacy shows up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, some of the other questions by Victoria, you've addressed them partially well. Just let me add that indeed, the socioeconomic status is a factor which renders these young women vulnerable. And apart from building their capacity and knowledge, you have to give them the tools. So your suggestion that female condoms should be made available is also very important. But elsewhere, we've studied the use of female condoms. Utilization is very low. Uptake among even females is low because they don't find it very comfortable. So we need to be very innovative. What other methods can we use to prevent? There are new opportunities now coming up, long-acting, PrEP and so on and so forth. We need to be able to go think outside the box because condoms have been used for a long time. And the socioeconomic issues have persisted with us for a long time. Even education is very impactful. If people are enrolled in school, then they are occupied and they can also be more assertive. So these are some of the mechanisms. I see a question from Miriam, who says that this question is to the last presenter. The last presenter, Joy, says that how can fear avoidance belief related to pain management? For pain management to be effective, movement and physical activity is key. So how can fear avoidance belief related to pain management? Can you answer it for us, Joy?
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, yeah. How can fear avoidance related to pain? Yeah, it, this is why patient education is very important. In my When I was working last year during my one of my postings, yeah, there were patients that I would have departments, and fear usually is one of the key things that we have to manage, especially with older adults. And so, when we manage patients, we try to explain to them what we are managing them for, and then even when they get back to the house after coming to the hospital, we try to tell them things that they should avoid doing. How we also ask them about their assistants that they have at home, and then how they go around in the house. So those things, as much as we encourage movements, we also talk about some surrounding factors with the patient. So when the patient is assured that okay, this and this will not happen if they take these precautions, then they are able to still be physically active, at least moderately, with the moderately exercise that we give them.
Hello. All right. Thank you. So there's another question to Brenda. The issue of mental health is in adolescents may need to be discussed in different perspectives. What are the likely determinants that have to be addressed in your opinion? Brenda?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our study actually did not look at adolescents, but I actually think that's a very critical group to look at. So we know that they're actually a highly vulnerable population as well. And you may want to look at other determinants such as their socioeconomic status, their ability to negotiate in a relationship if they are already in a relationship with the same-sex partner, the age differences. The age differentials usually also affect that negotiating ability. We can talk about the education status as well. So we know that actually we assume actually more than we know, we assume that individuals that are highly educated will probably be able to negotiate their way in relationships and probably be able to access even other platforms for healthcare and services, and may not be deterred by the same things that deter individuals with a different educational background. So I think you'd look at age, which is already that adolescent stage. Then you'd also look at issues to do with education. You'd look at, you can also look at the sex differentials. For instance, the first presenter talked about the fact that women, girls may not be in a position to negotiate in the same manner that males would be. So I think sexual differentials would also be critical to look at. So I actually think there are many determinants, and some of these determinants, unfortunately, in our study, we found them not to be significant predictors of our outcome, which was the mental health outcome. But I think if you conducted a different study elsewhere, you might actually find that they may have a significant association with mental health status.
Yeah, Brenda, Joshua is asking why you did not use snowball sampling.
It is network sampling. That's snowball sampling.
That's snowball, yeah. Okay, right. So these questions are so far. Thank you very much, all our participants. I like the question. Let the questions keep coming. Let them come. And if you have any suggestions, you are also invited to share opinions. You don't only have to ask our presenters questions. You can also share opinions. And I've seen that Olakumbi has points or suggestions for comments for all our presenters. These are useful feedback. But there's a question from Lena who says that apart from dealing with fear, pain management may be necessary. How do we balance pain management and addiction to pain medication? So I know this question keeps coming up. If you give them more opioids, if you give them morphine, if you give them this, are they not going to be addicted? It's a balance anyway, but must the people suffer if they need relief? And some of the pain can be very excruciating, and this is not only limited to arthritis. But this is a question to you, Joy. Would you like to say something about it? Where do we ensure the
Okay.
balance?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So, just like you said, there are different levels of pain. That is why when a patient comes for treatment, I'm using this as an example. When a patient comes for treatment, maybe he or she has been coming for treatment, and then maybe suddenly the pain aggravates. The pain is different from the last time. That's why we always reassess every time we see a patient. So, if the pain is, maybe let's say for example 7/10, because we always rate it, then that means something must have aggravated the pain. So the patient may tell you, okay, I had to use this drug, I had to use that drug, and then that's why we always check the drugs that patients are using. As physical therapists, we don't prescribe drugs, but we have our own pain management techniques, and that's what we do for them when they come to the clinic. So as much as they use some of these medications from time to time, we also tell them, when you're coming next session, bring your medications along with cross check, okay, this and this is what you're using, so that we advise them. We tell them, okay, um um that's why we give them home programs from like the treatments that we give them, so that they won't lean on the pain medications too much. So it also depends on how much we're seeing them, how many times we see them in a week, and then how they are progressing. And anything that's causing pain means that a certain activity increase the pain. So we try to look at those things, and all this still boil down to assessment and asking them what and what caused it, and advising them. Everything still goes down to patient education. Thank you.
Joy, can you throw a little
Yes,
more
sir.
light on the non-therapeutic methods of relieving pain, apart from, let's say, giving the NSAIDs and the opioids? Are there any non-therapeutic methods? And this is a question from Oyefunso. Are there any other forms of managing arthritis apart from the pain medications?
Yes, of course. Like I said, we don't prescribe drugs. Our own work here is to use our non-therapeutic measures, which are like of various forms, depending on the presenting pain of the patient. So we can't just use any of those forms of pain management. So there are different types. We have the using cryotherapy. We have, we have different types. We have using ultrasound. There are different types of pain management that we do in physiotherapy. So these are, like I said, not non-therapeutic forms of
Okay.
management. We don't
Okay.
prescribe medication. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Deborah, Sadi wants to know whether there were gender-related differences in sleeping and study patterns among the students you studied. Were there any gender-related differences between males and females?
Okay, gender differences was not something that we took into consideration, although we collected data on that. 65% of the responders were female and 35% of the responders were male. But we didn't focus on analyzing that based on gender. But there are previous research suggests that females report poorer sleep quality than males. There was a study I saw by, I think, Geary et al. That stated that females report poorer sleep quality than males. But my study
Okay.
didn't look into that.
All right. Thank you very much. To Josephat, Amand is asking, and this is a good suggestion. Actually, it's a suggestion that, we're talking about um, empowerment, knowledge gap, and practice. What about the education of boys in particular? We've talked about women, young girls, but how about educating boys on their sexual reproductive health responsibility? Can it help in any way? Because, the females are always at the receiving end, but educating boys can make a difference. Do you have any comment briefly? Are you there? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I
Do you
guess
have
the
any
question is,
do you have
yes,
any
yes,
comment on boy child education
yes,
respect to
yes, we do.
SRH? Yeah.
Yes, we do. We have social and gender norms as a recommendation, which we put in place also. And this has to do with organizing dialogue between both genders. And this is being governed by religious leaders, community leaders, and adults in the community. And why do we do this? We put this in place so that there will be no tension between the girls and the boys, because there's always this difference of knowledge that is always discussed in such medias. So we also do recommend it, and we strongly recommend it, because if boys are not brought into the picture, the whole job will remain on the shoulders of the girls. And whenever they want to come forth with it, it will be as if it's an attack to the personality of the men. So they are strongly included into our campaign of promoting the voice of a young woman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have barely 5 minutes to go, and so far I need to commend all of you for the very insightful questions, and after a good presentation by our five, the powerful five. So now there's a question to Joy, and this one I don't know whether I should let Joy answer. How do you use the non-therapeutic methods to manage sickle cell disease crisis? I guess we're talking about arthritis, but of course, sickle cell patients could also have bone pain crisis. Are you confronted with things, clients like that? And are there any suggestions, Joy? This is from Disu. This question is from Disu.
Okay, yes. So for anything sickle cell disease, there are a lot of contraindications to managing these conditions, because they always come down with different, bone pain problems. So some of the therapeutic modalities that we use are not indicated for these conditions, because it can cause, effects or other effects to the patients, like for like radiation, like there are so many modalities that we can't use. Even cryotherapy, we can't use ice for a patient like that. So yes, we come in contact with this kind of things in the hospital or in managing patients, and we manage them accordingly. That's why we work with patient-centered treatment. We will work with what we have to do with the patients. So there are other ways for us to manage the patient apart from using some
Okay.
of those modalities. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Martin Olinga is asking a very important philosophical question, and that given that modern African innovations remain constrained by deep-seated colonial frameworks, how prepared is the continent to pioneer its own independent development pathway? Clearly, Martin, this one, it's not to anybody. Let me try and answer so that we move on, because there's no time. But critically, it's important that it starts with a change of mindset. We need to first of all accept that we are an independent people in a particular continent who are capable. Maybe the colonialism has affected us, and mentally it has suppressed us. And to a very large extent, we felt unable or incapable to be able to be masters of our own affairs. I think it starts with the mind. If all of us will believe that we are capable, we can do something, then that's where it starts. Then we can begin to commit time, resources, and energy to making sure that we follow our own pathways for research. If we do not even prioritize research by our own self, there's a problem. And clearly, the West have contributed something. They've set a certain agenda, which is very good. We just not have to reinvent the wheel. We must just pick up the good things, and we must start from somewhere. Prioritizing it is key, and we must have a reorientation of mindset. I think we'll get very far. And Samuel Osunleti is asking Miss Okegbile a question. He wants to know if you collect data on financial support students get from home. Perhaps these two could have effect on their sleep quality. Did you collect any data on financial support? I didn't
No, I
see that
didn't.
in that study. Yes, okay. But I get your drift, Samuel. You are looking at how the socioeconomic issues can also can lead to lack of sleep. If you don't have enough money and you cannot eat well, it will give you insomnia to some extent. We understand the socioeconomic impact. It's a cross-cutting, determinant. Um, so thank you all. As we gradually wrap up, are there any burning questions before I ask us all to applaud very highly our 5 presenters? We have 3 minutes to go to end this session. If there are no questions, I'll give you more time for a break. Okay, I see no questions, and therefore, ladies and gentlemen, let me take the opportunity to wrap up once again. We have really, really been able to investigate the relationship between our populations, the vulnerabilities of our vulnerable populations, and sexual reproductive health in this session. We had 5 good presenters who did a great job: Josepha, Brenda, Gerald, Joy, Deborah. They've touched on different aspects of health. And I believe that if you refer to the pages 34 to 36, you'll get more details and you keep the data for yourself. I believe that the issues of healthcare delivery and mental health is very, very critical. Mental health is linked to many things. We need to be able to arrange for additional or linkage services to mental health. We need to use cognitive methods and processes to help people who have mental health, depression, and all that. And we need to ensure that programmatically we can incorporate certain important interventions, mental health interventions, to be able to deal with the issues of mental health associated with HIV care. It's important that stigma and discrimination is dealt with very holistically. And I'm very happy to inform you that the total facility approach for fighting stigma and discrimination is one of the new concepts, and which makes a big difference to make sure that healthcare workers offer seamless care without stigmatizing environment to recipients of care, so that people who come to receive treatment services and all that can do so and adhere to their medications. One project, extra sexy project currently ongoing, is also addressing the issues of mental health and all that, and the issue strategy for dealing with stigma and discrimination. All of this will contribute significantly. Ladies and gentlemen, until we meet again, I want to thank you all. Very great participants, very great presenters, and I want to thank the Society for AIDS and uh, Society for AIDS and STI in Africa for creating this platform to be able to discuss these very important issues that will empower African researchers. We look forward to more. See you, and I hand over the baton to our next session, the skill building team. Thank you very much, Gordon, and shalom. Gordon, are you there?
Hello?
Yes, I've handed over.
Yes, thank you very much,
Take the
Dr.
baton.
Stephen
Thank
Eisiado,
you.
and to all our oral ASA presenters for this very engaging and insightful session. Now we move to have a 5-minute break so that our participants online can have access to the survey. Please look on the screen, scan the QR code so that you can fill the survey. Please note that if you do not fill the survey for the 3 consecutive days, you will not receive a certificate of acknowledgement of being part of this webinar. So the next session would start at exactly 2 o'clock Ghana time, which is 3 o'clock Nigerian time. So we urge all participants to take advantage and fill the survey. For those across the YouTube, we are putting the link in the chat. So you can access the link to the survey via the chat and fill in the requested details. You can also scan as well. Thank you so much. The next session, which is going to be the last session of the day, on the skill building workshop titled Leveraging Digital Tools to Support Manuscript Writing, will be, sorry, the next session, which will begin at 2 p.m., would be the skill buildings workshop titled A Paradigm Shift with Storytelling. This session will be facilitated by Professor Babatunde Salako, and our resource person would be Dr. Musa Aminu. A Paradigm Shift with Storytelling. Facilitator, Professor Babatunde Salako, and our resource person, Dr. Musa Aminu. Thank you.
Hello, can people hear me?
Hello, Professor
Hello,
Salako.
can
Yes,
you
we
hear
can hear
me?
you.
Yeah,
Yes, the
yeah,
session will
I've been having
begin.
some challenges with my, yeah.
We can hear you clearly.
Oh, okay.
The session will start in the next minutes.
Hello? Let's see.
Hello, Prof. Yes, time is up, so we now hand
So
over
I
the
can start
session.
now?
Yes, we can start now.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where we are actually. This session, it's about a paradigm shift with storytelling. And this is looking at the opportunities for African researchers to be able to learn a better way of presenting their research report, or even in putting together the research project. Until recently, researchers have planned research without actually putting into consideration the communities that will enjoy the results of their research. And this approach has been seen to slow down the integration of the new knowledge that is detected from such research, and in fact to policy people too. Most of the times when these results are being presented, they are presented in journals, they are presented in languages that are not quite understandable to the lay persons who will be in the use of those research. But today, storytelling has emerged as a powerful tool for knowledge translation, community engagement, and for research impact, so that participants can actually be involved from the beginning in the act of project. They can help in the design of the project because they are the one who knows what they want. In the past, we have done this in isolation. Today, African researchers need to look at the paradigm shift from the traditional model where scientists generate knowledge in isolation. Dr. Musa Aminu will be introducing to us storytelling as a paradigm shift in how scientists approach research planning, the research process, and in fact, the dissemination of such research. Dr. Aminu is a neuroscientist who has worked in the field of addiction neuroscience and community engagement. He holds a doctorate degree in addiction neuroscience. He will be talking to us about storytelling and how this can be integrated into research process, research dissemination. Participants are requested to please post their questions in the Q&A so that we can see from that. Dr. Aminu, you have about 32 minutes to deliver your talk. Please, you are welcome on board, Dr. Aminu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lako. Okay, you can let me know when it's time for me to go.
You can start now.
Okay. I'd like to just quickly share my slides before anything else. Okay, hello everyone. Please, Prof, can you confirm that you see my slides? Hello?
It's visible. You can see it. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to speak to African researchers. I want to first of all appreciate the keynote speaker, Prof. Tolu Lokpe, and I want to say that I also have my copy of A History of Africa by Africans by Zainab Badawi. I've also taken time to watch the YouTube documentary in 20 episodes. I think it's useful as a science communicator that we have both the book from Zainab Badawi and the efforts that's been made by UNESCO to ensure that African history is being told by Africans. So I would encourage everyone to try and get a copy or go on YouTube and find this very, very important documentary. So as Professor said, my name is Musa Aminu. I am a recovering drug user. Fortunately, today I am 15 years sober, and this has become my superpower, that I use my experience from struggling with addiction to pursue a passion in neuroscience to understand the addicted brain, but more so to be able to bring compassion into the work I do with neuroscience. So my vision has always been, or my passion has always been, to understand granular neuroscience, but to use that as a way of informing policies and also intervention in the context of pharmacotherapeutics. What I try to do with my work every time I have an opportunity to speak about my work is to ensure that I weave in my personal story, because I understand the power of stories, that people often would not respond to isolated facts or facts that do not allow them to find their interpretation of their own worldview, but would respond to relatable stories that carry elements that allow them to see themselves in these kinds of conversations. So that's a little bit of background about me. So I'll try and keep this as conversational as possible. And I will be throwing in questions for you to reflect on while I go through my presentation. Marx says that science isn't finished until it is communicated, and I completely agree with him. But I want to pose to you today to reflect about who the science communicator is. For me, the science communicator is someone who is capable of accurately conveying scientific information to help us understand our world, or at least help us update our understanding of or help us update our existing understanding of the world that we live in when necessary. So three things should basically mark good science communication or a good science communicator. The first thing is that this individual is able to convey accurate scientific evidence. The second thing is that this evidence is carried in a way that captivates the attention of the audience. And the third thing is that once you have the attention of the audience, are you able to persuade them to change their minds about the subject? So if you're able to satisfy these three items, then I think you're doing good science communication. I also think that science communicator is a good storyteller, and we'll see why. But speaking about storytelling, I know Prof. Tulu kind of gave a background on that, so which I really appreciate. So I'm going to be building up on that. I want to talk about storytelling in the context of Africa and as a strategic science communication approach to disseminating information. Now, many of us in the science industry think about storytelling as a soft skill that's just kind of an add-on to what we do in terms of how we get papers out or how we get our results out into the public domain. On the contrary, I might disagree with that, because I feel as African researchers, storytelling has always been a part of us. And for me, I think storytelling is Africa's future when it comes to communicating science. And you'll see why. Africa is now, Africa is one of the oldest holds one of the oldest knowledge technologies through storytelling, that through performance, oral tradition, communal memory, we've been able to create cocoons that have held scientific facts, facts that have advanced medicine over many centuries and continue to benefit indigenous communities. Now, usually in these elements of interpreting culture or communicating culture through, or not just culture, but also the relationality of culture with the environment, and in the context of storytelling, individuals are able to find themselves in these narratives. And when you have an entire community that is able to find itself in narratives, then you are more likely to get a communal response than isolated response from individuals. I want to say also that when we think about storytelling and Africa, we must understand that this is not something that we are adopting. Storytelling, as I mentioned earlier, this is something that has always been with us. Hence, this is something we are basically reclaiming. I want to end this slide by saying we're all storytellers. We all live in a network of stories. There isn't a stronger connection between people than storytelling. Now, why is storytelling very important in science communication? I think storytelling humanizes science. For example, think about the neuroscience study about addiction, where the study centers a recovering drug user with some years of sobriety, and the story is being told from the perspective of this person. Or think about a situation where the science is trying to report on climate change or extreme weather change. And this story is being told from a farmer being centered and their experience with changes in rainfall patterns. I think this will create more impact than just isolated facts about either climate change or neuroscience or addiction. I think storytelling also gives us the opportunity, or gives science the opportunity, to be memorable. People often remember how they feel more than isolated scientific facts. People remember facts that are intertwined into stories, because these stories carry emotional engines that find or give them the opportunity to find relativity. I'll say a few things in the context of memory in neuroscience. Now, we understand very much that storytelling carries a natural mnemonic technique that enhances recall. It evokes relational processing, and by so doing, it allows for the contemplation of context and meaning of facts within the reality of the individual. And this is really what storytelling leverages at the brain level. And once again, in the context of memory, it's one of the best deep processing tasks of memory formation. Storytelling also creates linguistic inclusivity. As Paulo Freire would say, we are humans because we are able to name the world. And when we name the world, we name the world using language. And when we name the world, we understand ourselves in the context of the world that we have named. Hence, when people find themselves through the language that science is being told, then it is easier for them to feel like they are part of the science, and it expands the pool of participation in the science. And I think this is really why it is important when we think about storytelling in science communication, we prioritize the element of linguistics, which is language. And finally, I'd like to say that storytelling builds trust between scientists, communities, policymakers, and all stakeholders that are involved in response or collective responsibility for science. And once again, I said, as I mentioned earlier, when people find themselves in stories, then you are more likely to have a collective response. I want to say a few things about the knowledge deficit model. This is something I've been contemplating for a while, and I found that other individuals have also been reflecting about the same thing. And I will just critique it for a little bit and speak to that in two tiers. One, at the level of the community, and two, at the level of policymakers. So the knowledge deficit model is basically a communication positionality that insists that when you repeat information, factual information, it should be sufficient for people to understand why they need to make a decision about or related to that information. Now, usually this repetition of information is emotionless, sterile, and does not necessarily carry any emotional context, and people don't find themselves in these facts. And what we've come to understand now is that that is insufficient for people to make decisions, that people make decisions based on what they believe, how they see the world around them, and sometimes even based on how they feel, their emotions. And when people listen to facts, or when you try to put these facts before them, what they do is that they screen through these facts and find the information that allows them to affirm what they already think about the world. So this they call a bias assimilation. So we've come to understand now that it is not enough that we provide people with factual information about things, that it is important that we begin to think about integrating these facts within stories that allow people to find themselves within. Now, another danger to the knowledge deficit model is the fact that it has become something that can easily be weaponized in politics, because when policies insist on these expertise evidence, then you have political oppositions who are able to look through the loopholes and say, hey, look, you make this statement on the basis that you have a 95% confidence based on your p-value. What about the 5% that we can't account for? So because of that, I'm going to propose something else that opposes what you have put forward with the confidence that you've presented in this school of thought. So these are the things that we have to carefully think about when we think about our positionality as scientists, and the up-down thinking that information has to flow from us into the community, rather than a co-creation or a collaborative process where communities are also consulted or brought in to be part of the science. Now, what is the way forward? I think we need to think around an approach that allows us to organize our emotions into narratives that embed these scientific facts. And a model or framework has been proposed, which is called the narrative policy framework, which basically speaks to exactly what I have mentioned. How do you engage policymakers with your science? That you need to be able to create a narrative that has at least 4 anatomical features, including a setting. A setting is essentially the ideas or facts or scientific evidence about this narrative. Your characters are basically the emotional engines of the story. This could include someone who's suffered from a problem that you're trying to solve and centering that person in the story, or even the villains that need to be spotlighted in the context of the science. And the plot, which is basically the positionality of the character within the setting and across time. Remember, the setting is your scientific evidence. And then it needs to also have a moral, that there has to be a take-home message that you want the audience to. And usually it's better when you have very streamlined take-home messages so that you are not all over the place. Now, let's look at this in a more practical sense. What I'll do today is that I will use my own personal story and my experience with neuroscience research to see if I can produce these elements that I'm proposing to you on the call today. So I'll just narrate it as a story, but before I go forward, I want you to do something. Pay attention to the legend. I've tried to code each element in the anatomical features for the narrative policy framework. So yellow represents the plot, green represents the setting, blue represents the moral, and red represents the character. Okay, let's go. A few years ago, I was at a drug policy conference in Nigeria where researchers made compelling arguments about the benefits of legalizing cannabis for Africa. Jobs, export opportunities, prison reform, and other immediate benefits. What you see me do here is that I have carefully highlighted the plot. The plot, as I mentioned earlier, is the position of the character within the setting. So the position I'm speaking in this context is being at a drug policy conference, and you can find me right there. So I sat there conflicted because I struggled with cannabis for 10 years. It affected my ability to stay in school, fractured my relationship with my family, and began to affect my mental health. And here you see I've done what? I've carefully brought in the character, which is me. And experts say not everyone who tries cannabis will experience problems. Only 1 in 10 people will have problems. They say individuals like myself carry special genes that make us vulnerable to problems when we use cannabis. What I've done here is that I've introduced the scientific facts, but I've done so very softly. While this is a very scientific fact, is presented here in a way that is accessible to any person. Fortunately, today I am 15 years sober, and I have decided to dedicate my life to the pursuit of neuroscience to understand the addicted brain. What I've done here is that I've reintroduced myself as the character. Remember, the character is the emotional engine of your story. So here I am a victim of addiction, or you may say I am someone who's going to be exposed to the outcome of that policy conference that I was a part of, or people like me. Now, it will be another 5 years from that drug policy conference before I have my first eureka moment in understanding the problem with cannabis. My team and I had ethically exposed animals to the different parts of cannabis, trying to understand the effects on the brain. I bring back my plot. Indeed, THC, the most celebrated part of cannabis, caused addiction-like behavior in our rat model. Findings from my work also suggest that specific epigenetic changes in the prefrontal cortex involving microRNA lead 70 may be responsible for cannabis addiction. My study revealed that the same markers were implicated in cocaine addiction. Here I've reintroduced the fact of the matter, but I've done so. I still hold in some of the scientific evidence and the scientific jargon, as if you may. But I do this just for the sake of today's illustration. But what I would advise is that when you bring in terminologies that people do not have access to because they are not experts in that field, for example, epigenetic changes, what does that mean to a layperson? One thing you need to do is that you need to define these kinds of terminologies if you must maintain them in that story. For example, I can say epigenetic changes simply means how the outside environment affects the inside environment. The outside environment of the human body affects the inside environment of the human body. And this is also applicable in animals with a line or two. And the prefrontal cortex is simply the part of the brain that is responsible for decision-making. Something as simple as that. So when you introduce scientific jargons into your story, it is very critical that you're able to provide very simple definitions that allow for better public access and public engagement ultimately. So I'll carry on with my story. My first reaction was that I needed to share my work with our policymakers. Perhaps this will encourage them to consider making policies informed by exhaustive scientific evidence that will ensure that would ensure the protection of vulnerable individuals who carry special genes like myself. We need to identify this group of individuals with special genes immediately. I've thought to myself, thus, I hope funding this kind of research becomes another priority area for our policymakers. I believe that Africa cannot afford to legalize cannabis because of the many public health implications, including genetic vulnerability to mental health conditions, poor mental health infrastructure, and a growing adolescent population that is the most vulnerable to cannabis use disorder. What have I done here? I've brought in the moral of the story. And remember, the moral of the story is what? My take-home message. And I want to make it as few as possible because I want you to have something to remember after hearing the story. So this is a very practical way of working with the narrative policy framework that essentially highlights the plot, the setting, the character, and the moral of the story in your science. Now, let's look at some essentials of a good science story. Now, I'll probably be going back to the story I've just told you. To write a good opinion piece, there are three things that you have to consider. One is what is. What is, now look at your typical scientific writing. You usually will have a background, and your background often would make a case about the epidemiological context of that condition you're looking at, if it's a public health conversation, or other forms of background that speak to prevalence or the general knowledge on that subject or the problem that you're about to enter into. So your what is basically allows you to establish that. And in my story, as you notice, I said, experts say 1 in every 10 persons who use cannabis will come down with problems. I'm giving you a background on prevalence now, or the epidemiological context of cannabis use disorder. I also said, while there was this debate at the policy conference, individuals were talking about prison reform, job opportunities, and these are conversations that are happening out there in the West that speak to what shapes the policy landscape to the cannabis legalization conversation. So it's out there. So you establish this. You then introduce your big idea. Your big idea is often related to your findings. And then how do you allow the reader to see your findings as a way to get out of the what is, or as a way of engaging with the what is? So your big idea has to be one thing that you want the reader or whoever it is that you have audience with to take home. It could also be what you're proposing from what you could do from your findings. That has to be articulated into one defined big idea. Then the third thing one has to consider is what could be. And usually you try to create a utopian context of what your findings could do. It's like, in the story I've just told you, what could be? What could be is that we have a situation where even in the event where there's any kind of consideration for cannabis legalization, the science has to be advanced with these kinds of conversations to allow us to be able to determine genetic vulnerability to individuals who might have that kind of susceptibility. What I mean to say is that is the science moving with the cannabis research? And if we must adopt cannabis legalization, then the science has to be at a place where we know exactly who's going to have problems. And personally, I am not with the conversation about adopting cannabis legalization. I'm just using this for the sake of getting to my point about what could be. So what could be is to create a utopian situation where your findings allow us to imagine the possibility of what we could do with that science. Now, I'll move from just writing to also other forms of science communication that leverage storytelling. Let's look at creating a radio drama series. And whatever the context of the science is, I think you can take this template and apply it there. A good radio drama series should typically be cognizant of certain elements, including the language that you use. You remember, we already established that language is a means of accessing the world. It's a means of naming the world. It's a means of finding ourselves in the world. So the kind of language we use has to be very cognizant of the people we are speaking to with our science, or the people we are trying to carry along with our science, or the people who are in our science. You can also bring in elements like music and silence to know when to have short or long pauses, and movements or other forms of sound effects like the door closing. So you have as much of a cinematic experience as possible, because when people listen, sometimes they even see clearer. Let's look at some 9 elements or 9 steps that you have to take to be able to have a good radio drama series. First of all, you have to define the goal. Like in the opinion piece, it has to be only a few takeaways, a few takeaway messages that you want. You can't be all over the place with, you have many findings from your work. Say you do a doctorate research, there's so many elements that speak to what your work wants to put out there, but you have to kind of bring in the discipline of isolating a few items that you want the listener to take away. You define the audience and understand the language considerations, the cultural beliefs, and time of airing. So I mentioned language. I'm still reiterating that's how quintessential it is to conversations around storytelling. And when you eventually have your production ready, you have to also be cognizant of the time that this is going to be aired. Is this a time that allows you to target the community you want to reach out to with that messaging? So that's something you want to pay attention to. The third thing you need to do is to understand the community in which the plot is set. And the fourth thing is to get community members to be a part of the script writing and acting. This is a story about them. You can't bring in people or other elements from other communities to bring the science to them. You have to carry them into the script writing and also into the acting so they can find themselves in the science. Next thing you have to do is to build your characters, and you build the story around them rather than around the science. As you see from the story I told earlier, the science is essentially built around me and my struggle with addiction. So you see, throughout the conversation, there is that emotional trigger, if you may, that was carried through the science. So it should be the story of the individual or the community first, and then the science around it, rather than the science and then a drizzle of the stories about the community. You should weave the science into dialogues and make it simple but accurate. Important that you integrate emotional elements, as I mentioned. It could be empathy, it could be humor, it could be hope, so that you bring out that human aspect of the science. You pilot the script with community gatekeepers, and you incorporate feedback in the revised script. That is very critical. And even before you start your production, you must think carefully, once again, as a scientist, around how you want to collect feedback. Do you want to collect feedback through the call-in segments, or do you want to capture dialogues, or do you want to have focus group discussions with community gatekeepers before you air the drama, and after you air the drama to see what has changed and use them as a point of entry to have an idea what kind of impact this kind of material will have in the community at large? So these are things that you have to consider even before you start to get into your production. So I hope this helps. Now, I want to say a few things about co-creating with the community. I know I mentioned that in the context of the production of the radio drama series, that you have to ensure that you're carrying your community along from the script writing to the acting. I would quote Paulo Freire from The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is a book I just recently read and I really, really enjoyed. He says, the thematics which have come from the people, return to the people, not as content to be deposited, but as problems to be solved. So I'm sorry, I'm a scientist, so I might also be critiquing myself, but I'm just going to say this nonetheless. When we go with this traditional approach of getting all our fancy science into publications and we put them out there, it feels like we're just depositing the science, because in the end, you only have people who have this niche expertise like yourself who are able to access the science in your work. So science should be something that returns to the people to allow them to participate in the problem solving. The problem is coming from them. And why do we think that they do not have some of the solutions to the problem? And which is exactly my point with the knowledge deficit model. It's a positionality the science takes and assumes that community members do not know as much, policymakers do not know as much, and by repetitively giving them scientific evidence, it should be sufficient for them to make decisions. But we now know that that is not the case. Why is it important to co-create stories with communities? Scientific evidence helps communities understand the nature of the problem and empowers them to be a part of the solution. That is why it's important to co-create with them. Communities understand what works. For example, like in the radio drama series, you bring in the community, they know the right language to write your script in. We recently had a radio drama series that aired somewhere in South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal, and we worked with our community engagement implementation partners for this project. But they also had to bring in actual community members to tell us, hey, look, no, we don't use Isi Zulu or Isi Osa in the way that it is traditionally used. We have to use a language that young people understand. They speak like a broken version of that brings in some English elements or other elements that are very contemporary linguistic forms of expression in that particular community. And we gathered this kind of insight through TikTok or other forms of social media that we now know young people are most comfortable with engaging or communicating with. So we had to take that into consideration in writing the script. And this is really why it is important to do this co-creation, because if you do this in isolation, then you don't get this kinds of insights. Also, the community has depth of insights into the social dynamics of people. So you create a character in a story, but you don't understand how that character takes form within the social elements of that community. You know, so you miss the point. You might have a good story, but the character is from Japan and the story is happening somewhere in Jos, in Bukuru, you know? So there's a disconnect. Co-creation also moves us away from the knowledge deficit model, as I mentioned. They have lived, people in the community have lived experiences, they have deep cultural knowledge and even more, and we can really leverage that. So accessing these traditional knowledge systems and integrating them into science stories means that we bring our scientific evidence into the concepts of relationality and communal memory and collective interpretation and ultimately collective response. And of course, this is definitely the pathway to sustainability. And I mentioned earlier that, I mean, I'm not just saying this I'm also establishing this within the facts of the matter that in the concept of memory in the concept of memory formation, relationality is a very key element of retention. So this is really why storytelling matters in the science that we have to do as African scientists. I want to, I don't know how much time I have, but I'll probably just stop here so we can have more time to interact. Like I said, I really wanted this to be more of a dialogue than just me talking, so that I'm not also reiterating the knowledge deficit model. Like, I know more than the people on this call. So we have to keep the ground flattened. But I want to pose a few questions. What kinds of narratives do we need to start telling in Africa about African science? What impact do we want our stories to have? And for me personally, I feel like we have to start telling a narrative of thought leadership and knowledge production rather than a narrative of data contributors. Where Africa is just a place where we contribute data, or Africa, we need to have this grand fly. So we need to bring in collaborators from Africa just to complete or satisfy all righteousness so that this conversation moves forward. Or Africa, the missing piece to the puzzle. A lot of this happens in the genetics world. It's like it looks like the only Africa is an afterthought. The only reason why we are in this conversation is that the science can't move forward because they found out that you have this genetic diversity on the continent that you have to take into cognizance the genomics of the African population before you can advance the science. So yeah, I want us to move away from that kind of positionality in terms of the narratives we want to tell with African science. We have to also be thought leaders and leaders in the process of knowledge production. And finally, I want to end with a quote from arguably one of my favorite African scientists, Prof. Morenike Upong. Storytelling matters from the village square to the highest levels of policy influence. And I will stop here and allow us to interact more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aminu, for that very brilliant presentation. I have been trying to look at the Q&A box. Before I pick up questions from there, let me quickly ask you, in your co-creation model, what do you do when the community priorities conflict with your scientific intentions, your funding capability, and then, of course, the feasibility of the project within the community? You get that question?
Yes, Prof. Thank you very much for that question. So I think this is why it has to be a collaboration. The community has a voice, but the voice of the community is not happening against the voice of the science. And hence why we use the term co-creation, meaning that when we have the community identifying areas of priority that they want the science to pay attention to, the science also has to look at the alignment of that priority with its own objectives, whether it is in the context of funding or expertise of that specific science, and open up dialogues with the community to ensure that if there's any deviation or slight modification in the prioritization of the areas that the community is identifying, then the community understands why the scientist needs to make those kinds of modifications to ensure that the community is also represented in the science and there is the continuity of that buy-in from the community. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yes, and of course, if there are people within the community who may also be able to support the project in one way or the other, they will understand, having been able to discuss this with them from the beginning. Now, I'm looking at your field of neuroscience and the addiction issue. Do you think that using storytelling can look like being oversimplifying the problem, undermining really the scientific credibility of what you are trying to present to them. Like your findings suggesting that cannabis and cocaine have the same point within the brain where people become very susceptible when they use them.
Thank
Am
you
I
very much.
making sense?
Yes, you're making sense. I mean, I'm currently at a conference somewhere in Mombasa, and someone literally asked me the same question at lunch just a few hours ago. And they said, look, how do you balance science communication with your neuroscience and ensure that you don't lose the scientific evidence that needs to go out there? I think this is something that as a science communicator, you have to always keep in front of you to ensure that while you're telling your stories, you still maintain the integrity of the science. So when you go back to the story I told, you'd see if there's any neuroscience in the house. I don't think I've misrepresented neuroscience in any way. The only thing I've done is that I have tried to make it accessible. And once again, the reason why the science has to be accessible is that we want to increase participation in that science. So yes, it is very important that the scientist holds the responsibility of maintaining the integrity of the science while still making it accessible to community members or to policymakers. So that's something that we have to constantly stay with.
Yeah, let me quickly take one question from the Q&A from Charity. It says, is it appropriate to use storytelling and is it acceptable to incorporate imaginary storytelling where you bring in a character that doesn't exist? If yes, how do we balance this in references? I don't know whether you understand the question.
Yes, I understand the question. I mean, I haven't thought about a fictional way of bringing. That's a very good question, by the way. And I think that's something I want to think about carefully and even how I respond to this. But what I would like to say is that what we must keep in mind that when we use storytelling alongside our science or as a means of getting our science out there, we want our community to be visible. We want our people to be visible. So is this fictional story doing harm or good to the visibility of your people? And how does that allow you to maintain the integrity of your science? Because if you create a fiction and then in the process, you end up distorting the integrity of the science, then I don't think it's useful to bring in like fiction in this context.
Okay.
And sorry, just one more thing, Prof, before
yes.
And remember, say for example, if you're going to use a documentary approach to storytelling or whatever, or radio drama or a form of drama to storytelling, these are actual people that you're putting in the middle of the story. So do you bring in actors or do you bring in the real people that are affected by these problems? Because ultimately you want to induce certain emotional responses. But also, I don't know, I also have to think about this carefully. What does this mean when you bring in fiction, and is it still able to do the same work as telling real stories?
Well, I imagine that fictions really can be targeted to the outcome of the research, such that you might not be exactly saying using the exact events that happened, but you can create another event that will resonate with the thinking of the community people. I don't know. I'm just trying to also help to answer part of the question. Now, somebody here, Lena Musinya, is interested in knowing how can the impact of storytelling be measured?
Okay, that's a good question as well. I think the impact of storytelling can be measured in looking at the knowledge gap that has been breached by that story. So I would use the recent radio drama series we had in South Africa. And one way we are trying to measure the impact of that radio drama series is that, so I'll just give a little context to the project. It's about the impact of stigma on the quality of data related to HIV clinics. And one way we want to check if that drama series was effective in that community is that we want to go back to those clinics where people would usually disappear after a few contacts with that space just because of stigma in terms of their antiretroviral drugs. So when we go back there and we see that there is those individuals who would typically disappear in the system are now retained, are coming back for their antiretroviral drugs. That's one way we can tell if that approach to the community was effective. So essentially, you want to look at the knowledge gap that has been bridged and contextualize to the specificity of the science communication approach, whether it's radio or it's an opinion piece, and then identifying a demographic where you want to assess that change in attitude or increase in knowledge.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Aminu. Professor, I think Pius Odunze, I'm not too sure whether this is a question, but it says, do Africans genuinely seek to make global impact? Or are we just more concerned about measuring impact? Many Western countries focus primarily on solving their own problem. What are we trying to do? How can we use storytelling? This is my own addition now, to solve this part of African problem. What should we be building context specific solution for ourselves rather than trying to validate what other people have done? I'll try to simplify that question as much as possible. But I'm not sure if you could pick anything in that question.
So there's
it's more like a person expressing his views much more. Let me see. So for me, you were critiquing the knowledge deficit model, and you also thought the narrative policy framework may be a better way of approaching public policy. And you use the case of cannabis legislation to explain this. How effective will narrative policy framework be compared to the knowledge deficit model?
Thank you, Prof. So I think why we need to take the narrative policy framework is because we want to increase the participation in the science. And as I mentioned earlier, the science should not be something we just go to deposit in the community. The science should be a prompt that allows the community to understand the problem in a different way and to empower them to participate in the process of the solution. So we can't always assume that the community has no responsibility in the solution process or has no agency to think with us as scientists. And this is why they need to be able to find themselves in the science. And that's what the narrative policy framework kind of gives them. It empowers them to think with you as a scientist. It empowers them to see themselves in the science. And it empowers them to take responsibility for ensuring the integrity of the science as well. And what that science means in the context of identifying the problem, or is it in the context of preferring solutions or working with scientists to move towards solutions?
So the last bit of the question from me will be about the co-creation. Do you think we should also be looking at the decision makers and the policy makers in co-creation, involving them from the outset on the project script, for example? You gave an example of the radio drama thing, but I'm looking at a real project in itself. How important do you think we should bring the co-creation should involve the policy makers and of course the decision makers?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you, Prof. I think even with funding now, conversations around core research thinking, you almost can't have any conversation with anybody who's interested in working with you on that science without considering different tiers of stakeholders from the inception of the research design. So I think it's very critical, even in the context of science communication, that when we want to engage a research problem, at that point, we need to be able to identify all the necessary stakeholders that need to be part of that co-creation process, including policymakers, including community members, and ensure that they are carried along from the inception of thinking around the research design.
Well, I got one or two more questions here from Omorige. Please, how do I get, sorry, that's not the question. As an adult educator, I'm thinking if storytelling would be a suitable method for teaching adult learners. And another one that relates to that, say, can you please relate storytelling to gamified health education? I mean, creating and using video games to pass health information to people.
Sorry, the first question, Prof, then I'll take the second one.
Okay, it says, can storytelling be used for teaching adult learners?
I think you can use storytelling to teach adult learners. And I think it will be a very effective approach to teaching adult learners.
The other one is about creating and using video games to pass health information.
I
I
love
think
the
that would be
idea.
like in the drama
Yes.
scene, sort of.
I'm not a gamer, so I can't speak with the elements of the gaming world, but I'm sure we have Gen Zs in the house that can drop suggestions in the box from what they've picked up today and advise on how we can take elements of that gaming world to bring in our science.
Well, I think we've gone quite far in our time. I want to thank you, Dr. Aminu, for this presentation and for the very simplified way you have answered many of these questions. I dare say also in a storytelling way. Thank you very much. In closing, I can say that in the area of how important storytelling in scientific communication, Dr. Aminu told us that people will relate more to your scientific communication and findings. It's easier for them to participate in the science. And of course, it also builds trust when you do community engagement. The other one, which you have answered as a question, is about the knowledge deficit model. He critiqued the knowledge deficit model and suggested that the narrative policy framework is a better option. He used a case study of legalizing cannabis for Africa, and of course, using his scientific work to show and prove the reason why he would not support legalization of cannabis for African use. And the other one is the co-creation method with the community. He used the radio drama music, sound effects, which can be used in the drama series to ensure that you focus on the takeaways for the community rather than putting a lot of things that they may not be able to decide what they needed. So the audience needed to have the takeaways quite clearly, and the community to be part of the script writing. And you can also ensure that you do a pilot within that gate with the gatekeepers, so that by the time you are doing the project, all will be rolling out very well. I think in the long run, we have heard how important storytelling could be to our scientific communication. And of course, it proved the need for the paradigm shifts for African researchers to begin to use storytelling to present, not just to present the report alone, but also to help in co-creation of the science of the project. So that brings us to the end of this session. What is left for me is to ask the audience to ensure that they engage in the summary of day 2, ensure that they join the manuscript writing research page through the link that has been provided in the chat. Ensure that you also take an assessment for day 2 so that you can earn your certificate of attendance. And we will advise and plead that you be present in the Professor Erabo's presentation that is coming on the next day, I believe. And of course, you can also help us to invite more people. Professor Erabo is going to be addressing the mechanics of entering the Global Scholar record. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting one. Once again, I thank Dr. Aminu, and I thank the organizers for also giving me the opportunity to be part of this and to learn from Dr. Aminu's work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Over.
Thank you, Prof. With this, we have come to the end of today's session. A round of applause for all of us. We stayed till the end. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us again on this second day of our conference. I am Dr. Oluwayemisi Olagunju. I'm going to do a very quick recap of what we've done today and to remind us of salient points about few things we need to put attention to. Today we started with Professor Osayomi telling us about the untold story of Africa, and he emphasized the fact that finding our way must be through our own way. Nobody can tell your story as impactful as it will be if you are the author and the writer of your story, because you know it. And he gave us the different ways in which we can tell a compelling story and how we can always put the African background perspective to our story. One, he had admonished all of us in education, the faculties, to try and work on decolonizing our curriculum, decolonizing our research by critical consciousness of what is it that we are doing, who are our audience, what do we want to achieve. And he says, if you don't like someone's story, you go better write your own story. That is the way people will see things from your own perspectives. And how do we do this more? In research, we learn to quote African authors, which will promote more feasibility to the local knowledge available to us. And we also promote local knowledge production. We should not be taken as guinea pigs, and for researchers, the ethical aspect of it. Not that because we get funds, then there are a lot of things that should be done unethically. No. It's high time for us to stand up and stop people from saying the incomplete story because they have the limited view of what really happened. And he told us of examples of what happened during the COVID, how African engineers went about fixing ventilation for free. And by that, what do? We start to appreciate our own, start to appreciate our inventions, our productions, and start to really run with it. Let's celebrate who we are. Let's celebrate the knowledge we're producing from our continent. For some of us, we write papers and there will be no single African author. That is not too good. Then we move on to the abstract section where we have a lot of bright minds that were able to communicate their findings to us. We had concluded the session through what Dr. Musa Aminu just did by ensuring that he gave us a paradigm shift with storytelling, and he really did justice to that. And he ended up by quoting our own Professor Morenike Ukpong, saying storytelling matters from the village square to the highest level of policy influence. Community participation in all we do as researchers. That makes our findings to be relevant to our community. So on this note, we're going to be raising two announcements. One, as we have done today, signing in with only one device per person. Please let's keep to it tomorrow too. And today we're going to encourage you to please fill that survey evaluation form. As you do that, it will record your attendance too. Thank you so much for staying through till now. God bless us all. Tomorrow we will be focusing on leveraging digital tools to support manuscript writing. Also, we look at how do we do the politics of publishing in reputable journals, using our open science and the real ethics. We acknowledge your presence thus far, and we want to admonish you to please invite others. Tomorrow is the closing of the conference. We will want to admonish you to please come on, come on. Let's all be punctual. We love you. Remember to sign the evaluation form. Thank you so much.